let's start with you. Why publishers resist to embrace this data, business opportunities? You've been 20 years in the market trying to convince them.
Well, first of all, which is very puzzling to me, it's an old story. There is a famous French publisher, Jérôme Lindon, who used to say, talking about libraries, a book that is loaned to patrons is a stolen book. Meaning that a book is sold once to the library, but it has many patrons reading it. So they think that they have lost sales. What they don't realize is that by rationing the libraries through those weird business models, they ration the data. They ration the collective wisdom of all those patrons. And once you look at it the other way around, you don't look at it as my asset that I try to protect, my book, but you look at from the reader's perspective, and then you see the richness of the fabric of data. And if you were to look at it this way, then I think you would completely revise the way you craft your business models. I agree with Jens that hardware, software has to scale to be a global player. But as long as the economic business models are not changed, scalability won't be there.
And have you been able to put a value to this? Because in theory, you convinced me, okay? But I have many conversations with many publishers, and they understand the rationale you're explaining, but they have not been able to quantify the real value of that data. Okay, lose the sale, as you're saying. How many new sales I'm going to gain by giving me this data?
Well, the problem with data in the first place and metric is that very often, immediately once you have the data, you want to put a price on them. It's too early. Try to work with the data, see what they inspire you, the kind of holes that you gotta detect, say, wow, I'm not there. It has value despite the fact that there is not yet a price on that value. Once the thing is at scale, price will come up as an evidence.
Okay.
But work the value to deserve the price.
Okay. One more question before we go with the rest of your colleagues, which is in line with the previous panel. Regulation. In Europe, we're becoming very regulated in terms of privacy of a user in a lending platform, for example. Do you forecast issues in regards to this data management as like here in Spain, the library service do not provide any data about their patrons because they cannot do it by law?
So as a matter of fact, for those things that I was showing, those big screen in libraries with those graphs, it's a bit like a minority report type of experience. And obviously you have a lot of data behind that. We have done that with several universities. Yes, there was a regulation. But I'm glad that there is a regulation. And even I have US friends who envy the fact that we do GAPRD because I think it's a necessary step. What is, value at a corporate level, and you may say, let me do the business and regulate afterwards. But afterwards is, are we sure that the sum of the local values is a social benefit? And here, yes, there was regulation, but it was not that painful. We had to go to a GPRD officer. There is one in the university. We showed what we were doing, and he said, fine, there is anonymous data. Guys, you can go. And I'm pleased with that. As long as we go by the rules, and I do respect the rule, I hate being spied. So don't expect me to spy the people, to propose them on an individual basis. I try to make individual data points a collective treasure. And I don't complain that I had to talk to a GPRD officer.
Okay, that makes sense.
But if I can add something, there is an issue with that, though, for people like ourselves in addressing the audience. because when we're talking about CRM, for instance, we actually have limited very strongly, due to this regulation, the actually addressable audience. And it's an issue because we tend to consider, all of us, that there are a population of heavy readers that we can address. But actually, we see that we are addressing casual readers, lapsed readers, non-readers, people who, when they have read one book, one comic book, 2 comic books maybe, they are done. It's enough for them for the full year. So our idea is to try and address them, to talk to them, and to engage them into reading again. And that's really the challenge. And today, it's challenging to do that with GDPR because we can't address people if they don't want to be addressed. But it's actually a challenge for us.
One question, look, I'm a heavy reader of graphic novels and comics, so I understand the community in which you live. Could you think it could be replicated to other book categories? Your learnings, your experience, you go to, can other book categories create this kind of a community and engagement as you've been able to create, do you think?
You mean communities from the comic book audience?
Excuse me?
No, what do you mean, sorry?
No, I mean, if you could replicate your business models,
Yes.
meaning that your community could be replicated in another book category, like, I don't know, romance novels or
Yeah, exactly.
children books.
Yeah, of course, yeah. It's well, today we compete against very big players, all the GAFAs actually. So it's at the same time it's difficult because of course they have resources that we don't have. So that's for sure. But just in France or in French-speaking markets, let's put it like that, we are the 3rd platform in terms of for publishers in terms of selling their comic book content. Amazon is first. Apple is coming in number 2, and we are number 3. So we happen to succeed somehow because of this specialization in a way. We address communities, we address with a specific content. Whenever you come back to the platform, you can find other similar contents and a community which allows you to select whatever you would probably like when you try. So, but it's again, it's all about the question of having people retention. How do we get people back to the platform? And of course, this model could be replicated to other categories. I guess the question is, it must be a sufficient marketplace in itself to be worthwhile, I guess.
But Javier, you're very right. In fact, before Isneo was created, I was contacted years ago by Mr. Glenna from the publishing company, invited me, he had all his staff, and he said, I have heard about you, about what you do on the digital library front. Explain to me what you do to see whether it has some sense, and obviously, as you can imagine, he was very skeptical. And at the end of the meeting, I looked at him, and we obviously discussed the specific case of comics and all that. And I said, look, Mr. Glenna, you're fortunate enough that your community of readers are aficionados. Those guys, they live through comics, via comics, they love comics. You don't need a guy like me to play the intermediary. Mm-hmm. One day or the other, you publishers are going to coordinate to put together your own offer. I said to him, good luck, because it will take time before you agree not to disagree. But one day it will happen, and this is Isneo. Then you're perfectly right. In fact, it takes a lot of thinking of looking at, are there communities of readers avid of a given topic? And if you can isolate this, then there is something to be marketed.
Segmentation, I think is
through segmentation and playing with a community that is already there,
exactly.
Waving at you.
Yeah. Fabrice, it was a different Frankfurt this year, but I thought it was very positive on one side. People had more time to talk instead of those 20-minute meetings, one after the other. There were less meetings, and people were sitting with you for 40 minutes, and more business was done. At least that was my experience. But going to your idea of how we can combine digital and physical to enhance the discoverability book experience. Have you seen any model on other business and retail in sports that they already doing it?
I wouldn't say that. Well, not really. I think many things are on the table, but I don't see the real connections personally. I've got the impression that inside the challenge of discoverability, there is another challenge, which is the credibility, legitimacy of the advisors, of the ability of discovering something. For a long time, the discoverability was ensured by critics. Not only by critics, of course, but the critics was a large part of discoverability. We entered in another era, which is the era of recommendation. Recommendation includes critics, but not only. It's just recommendation. Recommendation through critics or through chronicles. Even critics are different than what they used to be, because in the media you don't have enough room to really critique. So you choose only the books you want to push, and etc. So recommendation is also ratings. It's also quotes from authors on books, etc. And this is very interesting, but you don't find the credibility, and I think it explains why everyone can do something. Everyone can do something, but how you transform this in something really useful for discoverability, I don't know. I think everyone has a role to play. I mean, Readers Club, bloggers, and so on. But it's important to, independence is very important. I mean, the credibility is important even for publishers who want just to promote the books. I mean, sometimes it's more important to have an independent person saying things, either online or offline. It's on a long-term perspective, it's much more important to have just promotion.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think probably it's a question of trust also.
Yeah.
You have to trust the
trust.
one people who give you an advice. And
Sure.
that's why human recommendation is often more efficient than IA. And that's why, for instance, we see that this community of super readers I was mentioning is quite working well, because effectively people can follow these guys and see what they have recommended and whether they liked it or not what they recommended.
Okay. Before we go for the coffee break, I would like to open the floor for any questions. There's a couple there.
Well, actually, it's not a question, it's a comment. We've spoken about libraries, and I think to qualify publisher as stupid because they're nervous about what's happening in libraries is really rather insulting to the publishing community. We have concerns, and we have figures to show that the concerns are not just imaginary concerns about the impact of e-lending on sales of books. Library in Europe, they acquire, because I think that you're also making you didn't make a difference between academic library, it's a completely different market, and public library. Public library acquire 4% of the turnover of trade publishers, 4%. That means that 96% of the revenues of the publishing sector in the trade sector is made out of individual sales in bookshops. With e-lending, with this possibility of having everyone satisfied freely at the moment where they desire to have the book rather than to have to open their electronic wallet and pay for it, we have a problem, and we have reasons to be nervous. So I think rather than calling us stupid, maybe the best would be that we sit and we talk and we have intelligent conversation to understand why we are nervous, why maybe we need to create a situation where people who have the means and who have the possibility, go to a bookshop and buy, or go to a streaming services like Isneo, because if the book can be borrowed for free in a library, why would you subscribe to Isneo? Why would you subscribe to any services? Public money, public authorities will never have the means, and this is not their role to pay for the whatever people want to read. So I think, yes, I understand the frustration of the libraries, but they have to understand the nervousness of the publishers, and maybe the best is, rather than putting statement like that, is to discuss and to find solutions that are satisfactory both for libraries and for publishers, and ultimately for readers and authors. Thank you.
First of all, I never said that publishers are stupid. I work with them. I said they are greedy. They should be aggressive. That's a difference. Then, talking about data, I'm the vivid proof for the last 20 years. When I started Cyberlibris, the complaint was, we're going to lose turnover, the sacred cows, the textbook, we won't sell them anymore, we're going to lose money, you're going to cannibalize the sales, and all that. Guess what? After 20 years of activity, we started with 25 publishing houses. We are now north of 1,000. They like the model, be it in public libraries and university libraries. We have made the proof that it works and it doesn't cannibalize. It opens, in fact, the spectrum of choices. And again, please, publishers, be aggressive, not greedy. That's a main difference.
I think Fabrice wanted to
as I said, we have been organizing at Livre Hebdo for 12 years librarians awards to award the best libraries and so on. And I think libraries. We receive a lot of information about libraries, and also anyway we follow libraries in our magazines and so on. Libraries are no longer, I don't know if they were once, but they are no longer lending machines. This is not book lending machines. That's not libraries today. Of course, books are in the center, but if I look at what are doing public libraries in towns, in communities, they are offering a wide range of activities, from gardening or from I don't know, various kitchen cooking, or I mean, this is sort of extreme thing, but there are other things, but various animations and so on, and they are bringing the book to this. It's always connected to books. That means that after that, of course, people borrow books, but sometimes they borrow, sometimes they buy. I mean, it's also a way to market the books, which can be borrowed or which can be bought. And I think we have in the jury of these awards, we always have booksellers and one bookseller and one publishers. And always, booksellers usually know librarians because they work with the libraries. And the publisher there usually have their souvenirs of what they did when they were young, I mean, going to the library to further studies and so on. And they are always really amazed by what is doing in libraries, and they discover something completely different. And they are not hostiles. When they see what libraries do, they are not hostiles.
We're talking of physical libraries, we're talking of digital libraries.
Yes, but I'm...
There is no proof of that. No proof of that.
There is.
I think the discussion about e-lending is a bit too complex to solve here, but I think it's a fair point that you made, and you both have fair points. I think libraries and publishers need each other, no doubt, and it needs some kind of balance between how much commercial core business is in danger when libraries go too wide, because the barriers of lending a book digitally are, like zero. So it's a perfect competition to other streaming services or to retail sales. I think it's a complex discussion. I'm very much in favor of libraries. I've supported them all the last 12 years of Bookwire, but I know now there's some kind of tipping point looking at several markets where the system has to be rearranged. Just trying to bring those statements together. It's really important that we sit together and discuss what works for the industry and not what works for the customer that is always keen to not pay anything.
I think it's a very good topic for next year for the organizers to consider doing a roundtable, because I fully agree that it's a topic that has to be discussed in detail from the different angles. So let's move to another question. They're going to give you the mic. No, they're going to give you the mic so everyone can hear.
Because, yeah, I think it is really a matter probably of the segment we're looking at. But in Germany, and Jens knows Germany very well, currently e-lending represents 46% of volume of e-books, but 6% of revenues. There is, I think, reason for concern at that point, because half of your e-books go through libraries and you see pennies. So, I mean, if libraries were willing to pay 10 times as much, I think every publisher would go, you know what, we just do libraries. Forget about selling ebooks, and then we forget about Bookwire and close all that stuff. Let's use libraries. You don't need Bookwire, you don't need anyone else. Go to the library. If libraries had 10 times the budget or 100 times the budget, we could just do with a couple of libraries. Everyone gets the ebooks for free, and everyone else closes. But yeah, I don't think that's the way it might work. Also in Germany, digital library users, so 20% of digital library users no longer buy ebooks, 26% of them buy fewer ebooks, but even 10% of them no longer buy print books, and 35% of them buy fewer print books, sorry, translation for German. So there is reason for concern, at least from a trade perspective. In academic world, might be a completely different story. I'm willing to believe that the library model has been there forever, and probably lending makes a lot of sense in that case. But with trade publishing, at least we think there is reason for concern and room for improvement.
Okay, maybe I can say one thing about that. We will done with the library subject. I'm not sure to understand this exactly, because we should measure the efficiency of libraries in terms of what is the capacity of converting people into readers. Actually, this is the only point, because there is a cost, of course, of managing also libraries, etc., to make them free in terms of access. But if the point is to just feed heavy readers with free books, what is the point? But if the point is to try and get people and young people to make them read more and just start reading, then it's a valid purpose, and I think it's worthwhile. But this is only my personal view.
I think there's a lot of room to debate, and I think one of the issues we have to analyze from the publishing sector, we tend to analyze all this as a business model, and we forget we're talking about audiences. This is our consumption models. People are changing their consumption behaviors. Maybe the person who is today reading through an e-lending library is not buying a book, will never buy a book, even though they will have no access to ebook. They have changed their consumption models. They will change, they will not go back to buying a unit. This is something that we have to understand, I think, in that analysis that I think the organization for next year has a very hot topic on the table. So before the coffee gets cold, is there any other question? Yes.
I'm sorry, because it's going to be a kind of a statement instead of a question. When we were designing this center, which is Casa del Lector, meaning Reader's House, we wanted to do a prototype for the future. So, I mean that I'm not talking about digital libraries, but in the case of public libraries, the existing public libraries, we see that the authentic meaning for them is create readers. It's a different issue if there are citizens without income to buy books, then the measures should be different. But we were centered on the readers instead of the books, because we thought that the readers or the citizens came here to become reader or a stronger reader, and then went to a bookstore to buy a book, if they have means to do that. Instead, there are other kind of measures. This is our statement about that.
Very good. No, sorry.
Finish. That with all the debate, I think that it's clear that we have a good topic for the future, as Javier mentioned. But more than commercial questions, that is at the end the conclusion of this debate, we consider that, and for me now it's clear, that is a gap between the publishing industry as a whole. I mean, publishers, of course, but also distributors, booksellers, etc., and the library sector, in terms of readers' profiles and the big amount of data that this library network can provide to the publishing industry in order to adapt the business also. So that's my conclusion. I mean, we need to continue with the debate in order to make disappear this gap and take the opportunity. Apart of the commercial questions that for sure are very important, of sure, we can forget it. But this is my consideration, and for the future, I'm sure that we're talking about that during the working groups. There are some interesting projects in the US, probably you know the Panorama project, that tries to link the publishing community with the librarian community in order to share data, etc. So from a European perspective, we have to try to advance in that sense. And well, it's time to take a coffee and continue the conversation.
Thank you very much.